Well, hello, everyone. I'm Dave Peters, Director of Student Support Services here in Everett, and I'm excited to be able to help provide some training along with some colleagues here for you in anticipation of the reentry of some of our students back to our schools here during this time of the COVID pandemic. And we're very, very grateful for the opportunities of both time and the ability to do research and have collaboration with other districts. We believe that the safety protocols and the training that we're putting together here are going to provide for a very safe instructional space for both our students and for our staff. So this training will be based on protocols that we've put together according to what we call a day in the life. And so this is the different elements throughout a school day, prior to the school day and at the end of the day, that students and staff will experience that pathway through the day. So a lot of the training elements that we're putting together here today will touch on many of these areas. And then also there will be some training that are more school-based. And so those would be things that will have to do with the drop-off and pick-off areas because of the different traffic flow, parking lot configurations, right, your hallway configurations, different scenarios with recess in the playgrounds and things like that. So those will be school-based. So we'll have this district-wide piece that applies regardless of what school you're at. And then at your specific site, there will be some more detailed, nuanced plans for some of these elements as well. At each of the school sites and district facility sites, there is a COVID site safety coordinator. Would hope by now that you're familiar with that term, and if you are not sure who that person is at your school, I'll show a slide here in a minute and we'll provide that to you. But some of the things that your COVID site supervisors are responsible for are helping communicate to the school staff and also communicating back up to the district level, so we can keep the questions coming. We can provide as information in a timely manner. That they're going to also oversee the PPE inventory. PPE stands for personal protective equipment, things like masks, the cleaning supplies as well, and things like that. And they will be communicating with the custodial staff and also to help provide some of the attestation support. And we'll go through these elements as well. So this is the list of the COVID site safety coordinators. That is this is the most current list. You'll notice that some schools have co-supervisors. And so just check with them to see the different areas that they may be responsible for or sharing. And again, we'll provide this resource to you as well. If you don't have that already, we'll make it available. So as we look at the day in the life, one of the first pieces of the planning has to do with getting students to school. So regarding the bus transportation, I'm going to take you through some examples with some little video clips of how that's going to work and the safety precautions that we've built in. So you will first notice that we have very, very friendly staff on the buses. There will be seating charts for students to try to space them out as much as possible to increase that social distancing availability. If we have siblings on the bus and if spaces are becoming a little more at a premium, siblings are allowed to sit together. All students will be wearing masks. Then this is also to increase the airflow circulation inside the buses. The windows will be opened 3 clicks. And so for that reason, we have communicated to families. We recommend that you also reinforce this, that the students maybe dress a little extra warmly just because of that. But there is a safety benefit in this as well. And that. So at the end of every route, the bus drivers will wipe down every high touch area. So the railings, the edges of the seats and so forth. And again, this is done at the end of every route. At the end of the day, every bus will be electrostatically cleaned. So these are cleaners that provide a charge to the disinfectant particles that sort of like a static electricity, and they will be attracted to the surfaces so that the disinfectant isn't circulating around through the air. It's actually just being attracted to the areas that you want them to do their work on. In this next section, we'll introduce PPE, or personal protective equipment. And these next few slides will be narrated by our district nursing supervisor, Carrie Johnson.
Personal protective equipment, or PPE. PPE is the equipment we use to minimize exposure to hazards that can cause serious workplace injuries or illnesses. PPE is chosen based on the level of transmission risk identified for the expected activity. If you have questions about what your transmission level risk is, or need more PPE, or questions about what type of PPE you should use, you're going to contact your building COVID site safety coordinator for those instructions. Use of the appropriate PPE is important for everyone's safety. Be sure to wear the right mask for the right task. Prior to COVID, Washington State Labor and Industries, or L&I, had already had defined levels of transmission risk. Along with the Department of Health for Washington State and OSBI, they have come out with COVID-19 transmission risk levels. We will be using those to identify the appropriate PPE for the tasks that are required in the school setting. Identifying wearing the appropriate PPE will allow you to do your required job duties safely. The higher the level of PPE used, the longer and closer you may remain in contact with others who are asymptomatic. While some levels of PPE allow you to be in a closer proximity to others for a longer period of time, when you can, you should still try to socially distance yourself. Something to keep in mind is that the transmission risk levels are what your risk level would be without any type of protection. When you wear the PPE that is required for each risk level based on the activities being performed, your risk level is reduced. When you add to that social distancing, your risk level is further reduced. Looking at the chart here, you can see that when two individuals who are both wearing masks maintain a social distancing, even when one is a carrier of COVID-19, the likelihood that the other person will get COVID-19 is very low.
All right, here's a visual example to help illustrate a little bit better that concept that Carrie talked about, where these risk levels, how they're defined. And that's actually really defined is if you were not wearing any personal protective equipment at all, how risky would it be to be in that environment? So for example, if you were swimming and you held your breath and you were somehow placed down at 500 feet below the surface, right? You're at a very high risk to drown, okay? Well, likely you might be able to swim back up to the top. But if you were inside a submarine, if that was your personal protective equipment, it's more likely than not that you're going to be going home for dinner that night, okay? And then same thing if you were in a canoe, it's a lot low risk if you're in shallow water. If you didn't have any equipment at all, it's very low risk. If you were in the canoe, now you're safe. Same thing with snorkeling, standing on the beach, you're virtually no risk if you didn't have any equipment on. So anyway, that may just help a little bit more. So when we're talking about like the care room, for example, where we might be dealing with students who have COVID-19 symptoms, or who may be they may be positive for that. If we're not wearing any protective equipment at all, we would consider that to be extremely high risk for being exposed to COVID-19. However, if we're wearing all of the proper high-level protective equipment, our risk is very, very low that we would contract that. And again, hopefully that makes sense when you think about hospital workers, nurses, doctors, surgeons, and just day in and day out, they're in environments all the time with different kinds of germs and infections, and their personal protective equipment protects them from that. So,
COVID-19 transmission risk levels. There are 5 levels, 0 through 4. 0 is in the blue and it's negligible. 1 is defined as low, 2 is medium, 3 is high, and 4 is extremely high. Masks and other PPE are chosen based on the level of transmission risk identified for the expected activity. Low transmission risk, level 1, is considered work where at least 6 feet of distance is easily maintained full time and only broken intermittently throughout the day. This level requires a cloth mask. Examples of this type of work would be in the general instructional setting or in the office setting with 6 feet of distance being easily maintained. Level 2, medium transmission risk, is considered work where at least 6 feet of distance is mostly maintained, but with tasks that require sustained several minutes of 6-foot distancing being broken several times a day. This risk level requires a surgical mask or a cloth mask and a face shield may be worn. Examples of this type of work would be individual small group instructional settings or in transportation settings with 6 feet of distance mostly maintained. High transmission risk, or level 3, is considered work in close quarters. So a room with multiple occupancy where at least 6 feet of space is not maintained and includes tasks requiring sustained close contact, less than 3 feet, for more than 10 minutes per hour, multiple times a day. This transmission risk level requires a KN95 or a surgical mask and face shield. We will be providing staff in these risk levels KN95s and a face shield. If supplies were to run out, though, the alternative would be the surgical mask and face shield. Examples of these kinds of transmission risk activities or locations would be most special education classrooms, such as life skills, developmental preschool, and developmental kindergarten. While these also could sometimes be considered medium risk, we have identified these spaces as high risk because of the unknowns. So all staff are being put in this risk category if you are in one of these classroom settings, so that we know that you are adequately prepared with the proper PPE to handle those what ifs. Level 4, extremely high transmission risk, is considered healthcare work involving face-to-face, close proximity, or potential for coughing or sneezing while working with healthy or asymptomatic people. Potential for droplets or biological matter or fluids to become airborne within the breathing zone of the employee. The requirement for PPE in this risk level is an N95. N95s have to be fit tested, and some people cannot obtain a good enough fit. So the alternative for this PPE is a KN95 mask and a face shield. Examples of this type of work would include caring for symptomatic individuals in the care room or during aerosolizing procedures with a student, such as suctioning, oxygen administration, and nebulized medications being administered. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, will be distributed by the maintenance department to each building via tubs. The scheduled delivery of this important equipment will depend on the number of students and staff that are on site. The COVID site safety coordinator will coordinate the storage and allocation of PPE for their building. In the initial push out of PPE for special services classrooms, the special services directors will have the specialized PPE for their classrooms in their areas and will distribute it appropriately. Now let's take a look at a quick video of what Molly and her team are doing to get us the appropriate PPE.
Welcome. This is the maintenance department and probably a building that you have not visited. Currently, the back area of our facility is serving as a staging area for our PPE supplies. Over the months, we have been identifying and purchasing and stocking needed supplies for when staff and students are on site. Let me take you on a tour. For example, each school has multiple tubs of PPE stock and supply. This tub, for instance, has Forest Views label on it. We have already previously sent out cloth masks for all staff in tubs, and we are ready to distribute more supplies and materials So I'd like to take you on a tour now of our materials in our PPE hub.
Last but not least, we want to talk about the extreme high-risk transmission PPE. That's the red here. Those staff members who have been identified as needing that type of PPE will be contacted by nursing services to have the appropriate testing and fitting done to have an N95 mask. So you'll be getting in contact from me and my staff to start that process. Just as an FYI, we will also have gowns. I don't have an example of one here today, but I think we all are familiar with what they look like, and so once we get them, we can answer any questions you may have. The other thing is that we want to really remind you and your students to wash your hands, wash your hands, wash your hands. And if you're in a bind, there will be 3 bottles of hand sanitizer provided to each classroom as well as refills. If you cannot obtain or find the PPE that you need for your task, you're to go to your building site safety COVID supervisor, and they will assist you. Thanks.
Now let's take a look at another important aspect of safety for both student and staff, and that is with attestations or health screenings. Any student, staff member, or visitor who comes onto our schools or visits our facilities must declare that they have no symptoms of COVID-19, and that they have not been in close contact with someone who has been confirmed or suspected positive with COVID-19 in the last 14 days. And this is called attestation. We have all been doing that as a staff each day through the RAVE online attestation emails and text messages that you receive each day, if that's appropriate. So the Department of Health has allowed for several options as of December 16th. They have updated 3. So generally these 3, here's the 3 different categories. There's one that is sort of a full family responsibility, and that they would be responsible for daily home screening, checking their students for any of the symptoms, taking their temperatures, making sure that they're not fitting any of the qualifications for what we would say as exposure, defined as close contact and not. So, and then they would attest every day, sort of like the staff have been doing, but on a student scale across the district. The second option is a full school responsibility where the school staff fully screen students, all students at school. So taking their temperatures, asking them questions, giving them visual checks for symptoms. And so then, but there's a third option, which is a shared responsibility, a shared accountability model, which is the one that we are going to be embracing as a school district for a number of reasons, which I'll explain. But it includes, there's a family responsibility piece for daily home screening and a periodic attestation. Could be done weekly, monthly, quarterly, or so on. And so we're choosing the quarterly route. And then there's that element where each day the parents are committing that they will check their student, just like in the daily attestation. They're going to screen their students, take their temperatures, make sure that they're and agreeing not to send their students to school if they're sick or show any other symptoms or have met any of the qualifications for exposure. And then the school responsibility is that all staff will visually check and continually monitor all students for symptoms throughout the day. So any student that we're coming into contact with, we're visually monitoring for any signs of the symptoms. The student quarterly attestation form looks like this, and it will run through basically spring break, and then we would have another attestation for the rest of the year beyond that. Has the symptoms, it has the exposure criteria, as we said, and then the affirmation statement. That's the responsibility of every single parent every single day. These forms are going to be tracked by the school health room assistant, and there will be two-way communication between the health room assistant and the teachers so that both are always informed of which students have not yet perhaps turned in their form. If we have students who haven't submitted their attestation forms yet, then those students will need to be screened until the form is turned in, screened at school. And if a student has COVID-related symptoms at some point during the day, the the sick at school and the care room protocols will be followed. And those are outlined in detail in the staff safety COVID handbook and also the family handbook as well. So questions about why are we doing this quarterly, and isn't it better to have them do it each day, you know, use that model instead? So we believe that the shared accountability model actually increases safety. And this is through conversations with other school districts that have used RAVE, for example, and they've let us know that one of the frustrations for them is to be sending down perfectly healthy students from their classes each day to be screened. And it mixes the cohorts of students that way that we're trying to keep separated. This method also minimizes then the student travel throughout the building each day, because again, the parents have done that screening, and we will be actively monitoring the students throughout the day. And this also increases efficiency, clearly, decreases the logistical tracking challenges, and frees up our staff members from having to do those kinds of logistical tasks to engaging in other safety-related or instructionally related responsibilities that are going to benefit our students. For the staff will be continue to do the attestations as we've done. Currently, all active staff are receiving online attestation messages through the Everett Public Schools email address, and also receiving it through a text message. That's optional, but most of our staff are receiving that through both of those means. So some questions about that. Will paper forms for attestation still be available? The answer to that question is yes. So visitors, substitutes, contractors, other staff who can't access the electronic attestation that day, they will attest in the main office at each of their schools or other district building. The big question, if I attest electronically, do I need also to sign in my building? And the answer is no. If you've attested online for that day, it'll be sufficient for that day. However, if you visit a site that's not one of your primary work locations, you still would sign in at the main office, just to one of the sign-in sheet that basically is the one that says I am here. You don't have to sign the attestation form again. You only need to do that once. And then probably the most frequent question right now is, can't staff members attest quarterly like the students? And the answer is that although the Department of Health does allow for staff members to use this quarterly attestation, this is a practical reason why we're not going to do that. So remember, the quarterly attestation also requires a daily active visual monitoring for symptoms at school, right? And with our students, we're gonna be doing that all day in the classrooms. But for staff, we would have to create systems each morning for every single staff to be visually screened as well, visually checked. And there's obvious barriers associated with that during that time of the day, particularly when we've got a lot of things going on. And so the daily online RAVE attestation that we've been using, it literally just takes seconds to complete. And so for the reasons of significant efficiency, Everett Public School staff will continue to use this option for their attestation. Here's our district nurse supervisor, Carrie Johnson, again, to explain about our care rooms.
Each building will have an identified care room. The care room boot will be used to isolate any student or staff who appears symptomatic or indicates a fever, cough, shortness of breath, fatigue, muscle aches, or new loss of taste or smell, as these are symptoms of COVID-19. While we know that these symptoms can also be symptoms of other diseases, during this time, if a student exhibits one of these symptoms, it will be treated as a symptom of COVID-19 unless otherwise directed by their medical professional. Any symptomatic student presenting to the care room will be sent home with instructions for when they can return to in-person learning in accordance with the guidance from the Snohomish County Health Department. Only designated and trained staff should provide care for students or staff showing symptoms of COVID-19. These staff will be trained and provided the appropriate PPE for expected activities and will be called the care room staff. Staff members in each building will be trained and assigned to cover the care room. In some instances, a special services staff member may need to help support their student in the care room. Registered nurses are also a member of the care team and will work directly with all staff to follow the guidance from the Snohomish County Health Department. Any student who is sent to the care room with any one symptom of COVID-19 will be sent home. Parent or guardian is given a letter that we're calling the Care Room Notification Letter. This letter gives them guidance on when their student can return to in-person learning. Care room staff will notify the registered nurse, the student's teacher, and the attendance secretary that the student was sent home and cannot return until a specified date. The registered nurse will follow up with the student and family and update those previously notified if that date changes. Things that can change that date are if the student got tested for COVID-19 and the results of that test. Prior to any student returning, the RN will confirm with the family the day before the student returns that the student is safe to return to in-person learning. In the event a student or staff member tests positive for COVID-19, there are reporting communications and procedures which will be followed. More details of this are in the COVID staff handbook and the student handbook. Highlights include that we will notify as few people as possible to the identity of the positive person. Communications are going to be mainly by phone to avoid information in any type of print form. If somebody is identified as a close contact to the individual who tests positive, they will be notified by the health department or by the district at the health department's direction. If you do not get notified, then you have not been identified as being a close contact who is potentially exposed. Once notified of a positive case, the district will work to create a close contact list to share with the health district. The school district will then send a notification to those identified as a close contact. This notification will alert them that they are identified as a close contact and must stay home for 14 days and monitor for symptoms. The school and school district will not share the identity of the positive person. Following a positive case, a thorough cleaning of the affected areas will be conducted, and it may warrant the closure of a classroom. The role of the health room assistant, or the HRA. The HRA will play a vital role as a member of the care room team. They will also be covering the health room when the care room is not in use. Donning and doffing the appropriate PPE and hand washing, they'll be able to be utilized in both of these spaces. HRAs may also be utilized to help with morning screenings, to safely distribute meals, and manage PPE as assigned by their building supervisor. They will have direct communication with the nurses to help them support them in this work. Any questions or concerns that they will have access to a registered nurse at all times.
Next, Joanna Peeler will provide us some information about our school meal plan for on-site students.
Hi, I'm Joanna with Food Nutrition Services. We're excited to feed some kids. Breakfast and lunch is going to be available for all students at no cost for the school year. The meals will need to be picked up in the school kitchen. The meals will either be served by the food nutrition staff or available to grab from the fridge. Breakfast and lunch will include an entree, fruit, and a milk. Lunch will also have a vegetable. The meal may be baked together like this one. For schools that are currently producing meal kits, please work with the kitchen manager to get your meals. For schools that don't have food nutrition staff on site, we ask that you order your meals for your students the week before using a Google form. The meals will then be delivered straight to your site. Thank you, and please let us know if you have any questions.
I'm going to share a little bit of information with you now about our classroom capacities and how we have determined the appropriate capacity to keep us socially distanced to meet the requirements of the COVID-19 pandemic. So every single one of our classrooms and each of our schools have been measured and analyzed to determine an appropriate capacity. Every school has received their social distancing capacity placards for each classroom that are received 2 for each space, 1 to post on the outside of the space and 1 on the inside of the space. The way the classroom capacities were determined is that we created a bubble around the students. That it's a 1 foot bubble from which those 6 foot distances were measured. So in a sense, we created a buffer 7 feet in terms of just the classroom capacity calculations. Students only need to be 6 feet apart, but we again created some buffer. Then what we did, let me just give you an example. If we had a classroom that was, say, 24 feet by 26 feet, that would be a calculation that would allow us on the surface to have 16 people in the room. And by people in the room, I mean regular occupants of the room. So classroom teacher would count, any paraeducators that are regularly there, and the students. So 16 people. But then we would look for anything that we would call a subtraction factor. So for example, the sink, if a student needs access to the sink, then we don't want to put a desk right next to that. Obviously, the main entrance to the classroom, that doorway, we wouldn't put someone there. If there's any exterior doorways, any unusual sheetrock protrusions where the vent is inside or something, any of those areas where you wouldn't put a student desk, we would subtract 1 off of those. And so for what may have started out to be 16, the end result might be 13, 14, 12, something like that. So just wanted to make sure that you understood how we calculated those. When you see this, the capacity number of 14, for example, on this particular classroom, what that does not mean is that you cannot have ever more than that in that room. And for example, visitors, right? So if your administrator wants to do an evaluation, or if you have some other, just some kind of an observation that's happening, those folks, remember, because we have these subtraction factors, you can have someone, an adult that could stand next to the sink, or an adult that could stand next to the doorway. And very, very likely, depending on how the teacher has arranged the classroom, you'll have other spots in the classroom where someone could stand and observe and just temporarily visit and maintain easily 6 foot of distancing. And here's Dr. Ringo to share some information with you about how our maintenance department is working to keep all of our students and staff as safe as possible.
Welcome, my name is Molly Ringo, Director of Maintenance, Safety, and Security, and I'd like to introduce our 2 custodial supervisors, Wes Erdahl and Trevor Bell, along with head custodian from Hawthorne Elementary School, Chris Kazin. They will be demonstrating cleaning and disinfection processes at Hawthorne and an appropriate classroom setup with distance furnishings. It takes a team for us all to keep classrooms, spaces healthy and safe. Neat, organized classrooms with minimal materials displayed facilitates cleaning and disinfection processes. A team effort between custodial staff and teaching staff. Teaching staff are responsible for maintaining custodial-friendly classrooms and for custodians to disinfect. We are all responsible for helping to provide a safe and welcoming environment. We look forward to adventuring together and having our students return on site.
So for those of you who may have not ever met either of these 2 amazing gentlemen, the top is Trevor Bell, and on the bottom photo is Wes Erdahl. And they work tirelessly, even pre-COVID, to make sure that our schools are as clean as they possibly can be. And you know, a lot of times they're short-staffed, and they just keep working at it, and they have continued that passion and that dedication, and increased that, I'd say, even more during this time of COVID. So here's an example of these guys doing some measurements for us in the classrooms. We've got Velcro or sticky labels that for social distancing that they've applied in many of our spaces. There's some Velcro dots that are available at each of the schools, so that if you wanted to mark out where desks could be positioned, that way it's easier to rearrange them if they need to get moved for vacuuming or for any other kind of activities. I'm going to show you a couple little videos here of some examples of cleaning by the custodial staff, and this is something that would happen at the end of the day. very similar to what we saw in the bus. This is electrostatic cleaning, and this is for a disinfectant that would be left on the desk for a period of time before it was wiped off. In this next clip, Wes Erdahl is going to be imitating a classroom staff member at this point. So it's important daily to keep surfaces clean and wipe them down. Now notice as he's cleaning, he's wiping as he's cleaning. He's not using a disinfectant. He's just using a typical all-purpose cleaner, just like we've typically had in our classrooms to do those general points of cleaning. Again, this is another example. He's demonstrating as if he were a classroom staff member with the all-purpose cleaner. Now, if he were using a disinfectant like the custodians will use at the end of the day, each of those disinfectants have what's called a dwell time, and that means that those lower toxic chemicals would be left on those surfaces for about 5 minutes before they're wiped off, and that allows them to fully do their job. In this clip, Wes is going to demonstrate how to refill a bottle of hand sanitizer. Each classroom receives 3 smaller bottles and a refillable bottle. He's demonstrating there that we don't use the large bottle for daily use, but rather the 3 small bottles. When they run out, you can refill them using the larger jug. Just want to point out, I think there's some amazing acting going on here in this clip. I don't think he's had any formal training, but look at those hand gestures, even finishing with the ta-da. These are an example of the items that are in the safety tubs that Molly had described. These are provided to every school, and the site safety coordinators are the ones that manage these, and that if you have questions, you can direct them to those individuals. So these are some daily checklists that for classroom staff, teachers, and paraeducators. And this is a lot to read through. This will be provided to you as well, so that you'll have this as a reference. You can feel free to hit pause and take a look at this list a little bit longer if you'd like here in this video. This is a list that principals and office managers of things that they're doing on your behalf. And please don't be surprised by the shortness of this list. Our custodial staff have a significant amount of things that they're doing. This is just from a very high level viewpoint here for you to take a look at. And this is another example of checklists that you'll be receiving as well. And so this is more of that day in the life perspective. So what happens before students arrive, throughout the day, once they're at school, and as they depart.
This next slide is around teacher planning time, and it is a major area of concern, and understandably so. Teachers are working really, really hard during this closure, and they need their time to plan. So not unlike when we were in the building pre-COVID, teachers can access their planning time during specialists and electives. Paras during this time would support students as they access the synchronous learning, the synchronous Zoom activities with specialists and electives, and this will continue to serve as their general education time, as the home setting currently is, and the remote setting is considered general education. If possible as well, pairs can help with supporting students as they work on asynchronous activities for specialists and electives in it as well. One thing to consider, and again, this is very much like what you would do pre-COVID in the building, is you would have to plan para schedules around this specialist and elective time, also with consideration of breaks and lunch periods for the paras working in the classroom. Something else to consider would be, working with the building administrator to determine if there's a need for an alternate location to do your planning, as students will be remaining for the most part in that classroom while they're accessing the specialists and electives. And something also to think about is maybe to collaborate with related services to do some push-in during this time. And, with a population of students who are returning, there may be concerns around behaviors that paras alone might not be able to support. If that is a concern of our teachers returning, the recommendation is to work with their building administrators or special services to come up with a plan to support, so teachers can have this very critical time to plan for instruction. As staff and students begin to return to in-person services, if staff are exhibiting symptoms or are not feeling well, the process for securing a sub is the same as during the typical year. You would log into Frontline to report your absence. And then the only substitutes who will be available in the system will be individuals who have received training from HR on the use of PPE and on remote instruction as well. So you wouldn't be selecting any subs who haven't been trained.
As we conclude this particular training video, I want to just point out that the information that was included here, as well as much more, is also included in our COVID-19 Staff Safety Handbook. That is available from our district website. You log in as a staff member, and then in the COVID-19 section, it's the very first link that you'll see. That link is always connected to the most updated version of the staff handbook, which is considered to really be a living document as we learn more about updated best practices, as we collaborate with others, as we go through experiences ourselves, and then also as regulations and suggested practices change from our health agencies like the Department of Health, CDC, OSPI, and the governor's office. So I want to say thank you so much for your attention here today. I really appreciate it. And please continue to reach out to your site safety coordinators and to us for any questions that you have that we can help provide answers for, to make this a smooth and safe process for both you and your students. Thank you.